Hail to the Chief, the American Presidency. Presidential powers. Every 4 years we elect a president to lead our country. Because the United States is such a powerful nation, our president is one of the most powerful leaders in the world. The Constitution, our basic set of rules, lists many duties of the president. As our country has grown, so has the job of our president. The president takes an oath to preserve and protect the Constitution. He is the executive power of the country, which means that he leads our federal government and enforces our laws. Under the Constitution, the president is commander-in-chief of all our armed forces. The president can recommend laws for Congress to consider. Every January, he reports to Congress in his State of the Union speech. With Senate approval, he appoints members of the Supreme Court and other important government officials. He can ask heads of government departments, his cabinet, for their opinions and advice. The president receives foreign ambassadors and, with Senate approval, appoints our ambassadors to other countries. He makes and signs treaties, though the Senate must agree to them. The beginnings of the presidency. When George Washington, hero of the Revolutionary War, became our first president, he was the only president anywhere in the world. Other countries had kings, queens, and emperors who had inherited their thrones. Only in America did the people take part in electing a president to lead them. Some people wanted to call him Your Majesty, but Washington insisted he was just Mr. President, no different from his fellow citizens. As the first president, Washington helped lay the foundation of our government. He became an example for all the presidents who followed him. Because he refused to run for a third term, no president except Franklin Roosevelt has served more than 2 terms. Now the Constitution limits the president to 2 terms. Washington appointed all the members of the first Supreme Court. He named the first heads of government departments. In his day, these were the Secretaries of State, Treasury, and War, and the Attorney General. These officials became known as the President's Cabinet, even though the Constitution never mentions this word. Today, there are 14 departments in this cabinet. Leaders in war. Many Americans honor Abraham Lincoln as our greatest president. Tall and lean, he was born in a frontier log cabin. He became a successful lawyer, a popular public speaker, and a member of Congress. As commander-in-chief, this kind, gentle, and wise leader held the Union together during the terrible years of the Civil War and brought an end to slavery. In the War of 1812, James Madison governed the country from Virginia after the British Army burned Washington. James Polk led the country in a war against Mexico in 1846. William McKinley prayed for divine guidance before asking Congress to declare war on Spain in 1898. Harry Truman sent American forces to fight communism in Korea, as John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson, and Richard Nixon did in Vietnam. In 1990, George Bush ordered U.S. troops to the Persian Gulf when Iraq invaded Kuwait. Under Bill Clinton, American forces took part in an international effort to bring peace to Kosovo. 3 of our presidents, Zachary Taylor, Ulysses Grant, and Dwight Eisenhower, were elected largely because of their reputations as wartime generals. Leaders in hard times. Another of our greatest presidents, Franklin Roosevelt, led the nation through difficult times. In the Great Depression, members of 1 out of every 3 American families lost their jobs. Millions of men, women, and children faced poverty and hunger by asking Congress to pass laws easing the efforts of the hard times. Roosevelt gave hope to our struggling country. Until the Great Depression of 1929, economic hard times were called panics. The Panic of 1837 lasted until 1843 and cost Martin Van Buren any chance of re-election. In the past, government did not do much to manage the economy, so people were not surprised that James Buchanan did nothing to help poor farmers during the Panic of 1857. Ulysses Grant in 1873 and Grover Cleveland in 1893 both asked Congress to build up gold reserves to restore faith in American currency. By 1930, the Great Depression had become so severe that Herbert Hoover began limited aid to businesses, homeowners, and farmers. Franklin Roosevelt vastly expanded these efforts, but the hard times only ended when factories began to produce military supplies for World War II. Harry Truman, John Kennedy, Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, Jimmy Carter, and George Bush all proposed actions such as price controls, tax cuts, and spending programs to help ease recessions. Enforcing the laws. When Dwight Eisenhower was president, the Supreme Court ruled that segregation, separating people by skin color, was illegal in America's schools. How could he make sure that the court's rulings, now the law of the land, was obeyed? Eisenhower had led American forces during World War II, which taught him the importance of taking difficult but necessary actions. To end segregation, he ordered federal troops to make sure that all children could attend school safely. Presidents sometimes take action to enforce unpopular laws. George Washington sent troops to Pennsylvania to put down a revolt by farmers protesting high taxes. To protect the rights of every citizen to vote, Lyndon Johnson sent federal observers to elections in several states. On at least one occasion, a president refused to uphold the law. Andrew Jackson ordered the Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Cherokee, and Seminole nations to move to reservations in the West. The Supreme Court ruled that this order was unconstitutional, but Jackson sent in the army and the Native Americans were forced off their lands. Expanding the country. When France offered to sell Louisiana to the United States, Thomas Jefferson had a decision to make. The Constitution did not say whether he could or could not buy the land. Jefferson decided that he could, so in 1803, the Louisiana Purchase more than doubled the size of the United States, all for less than 3 cents an acre. In 1819, James Monroe bought Florida from Spain. Franklin Pierce bought a strip of land from Mexico in 1853 so that a railroad could be built across it. The land became part of New Mexico and Arizona. When Andrew Johnson's Secretary of State, William Seward, proposed buying a vast area in the far north, people were astonished. Why would anyone want Seward's folly? Since then, people have found gold and oil there, and Alaska is our 49th state. The Presidents and Congress. Under the Constitution, presidents may propose new laws to Congress. After the assassination of John Kennedy, Lyndon Johnson convinced Congress to pass more than a dozen laws that he and the fallen president had wanted. Some of these laws protected consumers or guaranteed equal rights in jobs, housing, and voting. Others set standards for clean air and water. Still others created programs for children and provided medical care to the poor and elderly. Franklin Roosevelt made government a part of everyday life when he created Social Security, government payments to retired people, and started providing money and other help to poor families and people without jobs. Woodward Wilson and Theodore Roosevelt led Congress in strengthening regulating businesses. Congress responded to Harry Truman by providing money for foreign aid, raising the minimum wage, and getting rid of slums. President Ronald Reagan and George Bush worked to reduce the role of government. Under Bill Clinton, the budget was balanced for the first time since the 1960s. Leaders in the world. When World War I broke out in Europe, Woodrow Wilson tried hard to keep our country neutral. When American ships were attacked and American citizens died in battles at sea, the country was forced to enter the war. When it was over, Wilson met with the leaders of Britain, France, and Italy. He suggested bringing the countries of the world together as a League of Nations to end war forever. Unfortunately, the peace lasted for only 20 years. President George Washington had warned against entangling alliances, but since his time, the United States has grown so powerful that our country cannot avoid close ties with other nations. The U.S. has always been interested in Latin America. James Monroe warned Europe to keep hands off. William Howard Taft advanced American business interest in the region, and Franklin Roosevelt promised to make the U.S. a good neighbor to the Latin American countries. In the 1850s, Millard Fillmore opened relations with Japan. Since World War II, most of our presidents have played a personal role in the world affairs. In the 1970s, Richard Nixon improved a difficult relationship with China. Later, Jimmy Carter and Bill Clinton brought together leaders of the Middle East in a search for peace. Leaders of their parties. By the time Andrew Jackson was elected, political parties were becoming important. Since his day, the president has always been the leader of his party, though the Constitution says nothing at all about political parties. Jackson used his party, the Democrats, to run his election campaign. His followers called him a man of the people. He rewarded them with government jobs. This power to appoint officials gives presidents great influence over the party. Political parties first played a role in the election of 1800. The Federation, led by John Adams, favored a strong central government. Thomas Jefferson, Democratic Republicans, argued that the states should have more power. Today, political parties are a major part of the election process, and presidents still use their power of the appointment to reward supporters and build party loyalties. The cost of campaigns has now become so great that presidents must spend much of their time raising money for their party. This has led to calls for spending limits. Ronald Reagan, the great communicator, had a gift for attracting huge crowds and large donations at party rallies. Dark horse candidates. Political parties nominated a candidate to run for president. Usually they chose the best-known party member. In 1844, though, the Democrats had a problem. 4 different candidates all had support, but none had enough to be nominated. Finally, the party chose James Polk. He was the first dark horse, an unknown who beats out famous candidates and wins the nomination. Before primary elections became common, party leaders often made deals at conventions. Sometimes the leaders chose a compromise candidate. Franklin Pierce, Rutherford Hayes, James Garfield, and Benjamin Harrison all defeated better-known men for nomination. Dark horse candidate Warren Harding was chosen by a handful of Republican leaders late one night in 1920. Because dark horse candidates usually have limited support, none of these presidents rank among the country's stronger leaders. Getting elected. In 1948, everyone thought that Harry Truman could not win a second term in office. Everyone, that is, except Truman himself. Starting with a rousing speech to the convention, he surprised his party and the nation. Truman toured the country by train, stopping to give more than 300 speeches. Some newspapers predicted that his opponent would win, but the voters went for Truman. Ultimately, it is not the party, not the polls, but the people who elect a president. Candidates, therefore, have to appeal to the voters. Instead of traveling the country in 1888, Benjamin Harrison made reporters and political leaders come to him. William McKinley ran a similar front porch campaign from his home in 1896. as did Warren Harding in 1920. It worked. They were all elected. Slogans help win elections. In 1840, the slogan, "Tippecanoe and Tyler too," helped elect William Henry Harrison, hero of the Battle of Tippecanoe, and his running mate, John Tyler. One of the simplest yet most effective slogans helped to elect Dwight Eisenhower in 1952 and 1956, "I like Ike." Grover Cleveland has the distinction of being the only man to win the presidency in 1884, then lose it in 1888, then win it again in 1892. Removing a president. Congress and President Andrew Johnson disagreed on how to restore the Union after the Civil War and on how the defeated South should be treated. Their argument became so bitter that the House of Representatives impeached Johnson. They accused him of disobeying laws that Congress had passed and asked the Senate to put him on trial. By a margin of just one vote, the Senate refused to convict him, and Johnson served out the rest of his term. There are two steps to removing a president from office. The House of Representatives impeaches a president by a majority vote, accusing him of high crimes and misdemeanors. The Senate then holds a trial. The president is removed from the office only if 2/3 of the senators vote for conviction. In Johnson's case, the crime was firing a cabinet officer without approval of Congress. Bill Clinton was impeached in 1998 for lying about his personal life to a grand jury, but the Senate acquitted him. In 1874, the House of Judiciary Committee voted to recommend the impeachment of Richard Nixon for blocking an investigation into crimes committed during the 1972 election. Before the full House could act, however, Nixon resigned from office. Vice presidents as presidents. In 1841, for the first time, a president died in office. The Constitution was clear. The duties of the office now went to the vice president. But was the vice president, John Tyler, now president by title, or was he just an acting president? Tyler was certain that he deserved to be called president. He even refused to open mail addressed to the acting president. Ever since, when a president has died in office, the vice president has taken the title of president. 9 times in our history, the vice president has assumed the office of the president. Presidential assassinations brought to office Andrew Johnson in 1865, Chester Arthur in 1881, Theodore Roosevelt in 1901, and Lyndon Johnson in 1963. In addition to Tyler, 3 others have succeeded to office on the death of the president: Millard Fillmore in 1850, Calvin Coolidge in 1923, and Harry Truman in 1945. The only president to resign from office was Richard Nixon in 1974. The vice president, Gerald Ford, immediately became president. Roosevelt, Coolidge, Truman, and Johnson were later elected to terms of their own. Presidential families. He was a busy and active president, but Theodore Roosevelt still found time to enjoy his family. People have always thought of our president as the head of the American family. Roosevelt's 6 children turned the White House into a lively and hectic family home. They played tag in the hallways, scrambled through the president's office, and rode ponies and played baseball on the lawn. They also kept pets: dogs, rabbits, birds, a badger, and even a black bear cub. The public loved the president, his family, and pets. 2 bachelors have been elected president. James Buchanan never married. Grover Cleveland was the only president to be married in the White House. His daughter Esther is the only child ever actually born in the White House itself. By far, the largest presidential family was John Taylor's 6 daughters and 8 sons. Politics sometimes seem to run in families. John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams. Benjamin Harrison, the grandson of William Henry Harrison, and Franklin Roosevelt, the cousin of Theodore Roosevelt. Hail to the Chief, the American Presidency.